world has reached a stage where there is zero tolerance for terrorism. You may recall that Secretary Clinton, when she had visited Pakistan, in a public statement had said that you can't expect to breed snakes in your neighborhood and think that they will never bite you. India is looking at the reordering of supply chains that is happening globally with a different lens. The relationship has been defined in a certain way. It has been called US-India Compact for the 21st century. And Compact has been elaborated further as catalyzing opportunity for military partnership, accelerated commerce and technology.
Hello and welcome to USISPF Conversations, where we showcase the brilliance of our board members and a series of experts, veterans of the industry. And my guest today epitomizes that expertise, Ambassador Arun Singh, former ambassador of India to the United States, Israel and France, advisor here to the board at USISPF, senior counselor at the Cohen Group, non-resident fellow at Carnegie, India, and if that's not enough, over 3 decades serving in India's foreign policy making. Ambassador, welcome back to Washington.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. Delighted to be speaking with you.
Yeah. Ambassador, I want to take you back in time. A decade ago, you took the reins here at India House, leading as India's top envoy to Washington. A lot has changed since then, but some things remain the same, particularly given the upward trajectory of US-India relations. So, in the 10 years since you passed, talk us through that.
So, in fact, I'd like to take you back to 2008. Because that's when I first started working on the India-US relationship. And that's when I came here as the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Indian Embassy. And I must share with you that, in fact, I arrived here on 9th October 2008. And on 10th October 2008, the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement between India and the US was signed by our then Foreign Minister Pranab Mukherjee and the US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. So obviously, I had nothing to do with getting the agreement through, but I benefited a lot in my work from that agreement having been done. Now, if you compare the relationship to what it was then to what it is now, there's a dramatic transformation. In 2008, India hardly bought any defense supplies from the US. By now, we have contracted to buy more than $25 billion worth of defense supplies from the US. And some of the platforms India has bought from the US, the C-17 aircraft, C-130, the P-8I maritime reconnaissance aircraft. These have been very useful for India in terms of these objectives: maritime reconnaissance, moving troops, evacuating Indians from areas under distress. So this has worked very well. And it is not just a buyer-seller relationship. India and the US are now looking at partnership in defense technologies. US has authorized 80% technology transfer for the GE414 engine. And the US says that this level of technology transfer they have not authorized to any other partner of the US, including any of its NATO partners. They are also looking at co-development of technology. In 2023, US-India launched what was called IndiaChina, India-US Defense Acceleration Ecosystem, where USISPF has also been involved, and bringing together startups in defense technology from both governments. And from what I understand, there have been joint challenges, joint awards. Some technologies are emerging. Now they need to be scaled up to the commercial level. So that progress has happened. So this is just reflecting one area of partnership. Another area where I see that there is tremendous progress is in terms of the technology partnerships. Till 2008, we hardly had any major technology partnership. We had the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement that started the process of allowing more and higher technologies access for India. And after that, in 2012-13, the US launched the DTTI, the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative, to take the relationship to another level. In 2016, President Obama declared India a major defense partner, again to enable higher level of defense technology partnerships. In 2018, President Trump declared India as placed at STA level 1, Strategic Trade Authorization level 1. And as the US said, with this authorization, India has the same technology access as the NATO partners and closest partners of the United States. And then if you come to 2023, the Biden administration launched the ISET process, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, where they said that partnership in artificial intelligence, quantum, cyber, 6G, biotech, semiconductors, defense and space. And so critical areas. And following that, 6 US companies announced investments in India in semiconductors, We have already spoken about the GE414 technology partnership. And in space, new partnerships was announced. It is expected that by the end of May, an Indian astronaut will be launched into space on board SpaceX in partnership with NASA to go to the International Space Station, where NASA and ISRO will do joint research there. So that's one level of partnership. And again, it is expected that soon NASA and ISRO will together launch the NISAR satellite. It's a powerful $1.5 billion satellite which will go around the Earth twice in less than 2 weeks for very, very powerful mapping to be carried out. So this is the cooperation that we are witnessing. And then as the incoming Trump administration has built further on ISET and has now classified the partnership as trust, transforming the relationship utilizing strategic technologies and signaling that they will deepen partnership in these areas. So when you recapture all this, what you see is that step by step, the relationship has consolidated. It has consolidated through Republican and Democratic administrations. The new phase was started, in a sense, in 2000 by the Democratic President Clinton when he went to India for a visit. Then under Republican George Bush, we had the Transformational Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. Then under Democratic President Obama, we had the Major Defense Partnership, and President Obama said that US will support India for permanent membership of UN Security Council. And he worked with India to enable India to become a member of the multilateral export control regimes, the MTCR, the Wassenaar Group, the Australia Group. And then after that, President Trump placed India on STA level 1 authorization. President Biden initiated the partnership on critical and emerging technologies, and with all that is continuing. And today, if you see, in February this year, the Indian Prime Minister was invited to visit the White House.
Yes.
And he was the 4th foreign leader invited by the White House at this administration. And if you look at who else was invited, you had the Israeli Prime Minister, the King of Jordan, Prime Minister of Japan, and the Prime Minister of India. So you can see, in a sense, the focus that is being placed. Certainly West Asia, the Middle East, but also the Asia Pacific and the India relationship. And in the joint statement that was issued after the Prime Minister's visit, the relationship has been defined in a certain way. It has been called USIndia Compact for the 21st century. And Compact has been elaborated further as catalyzing opportunity for military partnership, accelerated commerce and technology. And we spoke about technology, but even if you look at trade, India and the US are today engaged in a very serious and intense discussion to get a multi-sectoral free trade agreement done. The Indian Commerce Minister was here. After that, the Assistant USTR went to India. Then the chief negotiator from the Indian side came here. They had detailed, from what I understand, sectoral discussions. Terms of reference for a trade agreement have been finalized. And detailed discussions are going on. And when you see comments from both sides, the sense one gets is that they're satisfied with the progress, and a very determined effort is being made to get a multi-sectoral free trade agreement done before the fall of this year, which is mentioned in the joint statement. And I think another indicator of the intent from the Indian side is that 2 days ago, the India-UK free trade agreement was finalized and launched. And this had been negotiation for years. And the fact that India and the UK were able to finalize this means that India is looking at the reordering of supply chains that is happening globally with a different lens, and wants to seize the opportunities to deepen economic partnerships. So you have the trade agreement with the UK, the one with the US is being discussed, and then there is a lot of work going on in the India-EU free trade agreement. So that's where we are. I think we should be satisfied with what has happened so far, and I think the prognosis for the future is very good and very strong.
I think that's the thing, we're talking with experts like yourself. You answer all my rest of the question. That itself is such a great podcast, and compressing history in just a few minutes, especially on the US-India relations, as you rightly said. We once called it from aid to trade, estrangement to engagement, and from nuclear sanction to the civil nuclear deal, all under a decade, to the major defense partnership in 2016, STA1, and then ISET, INDA6, and Trust and Compact. So it's politically agnostic as well. And the one thing that President Trump did prioritize in Trump 1.0 was the Indo-Pacific. That's sort of building on President Obama's pivot to Asia. And while there's a lot has changed in President Trump's 2.0, There's one thing that's still the same. That's Indo-Pacific is still a priority, as you've seen with Trust and Compact and the Quad. Is the elephant in the room the dragon, the China factor? That's why, even though President Trump may move away from more Western European engagement like NATO, there's still a priority for the Indo-Pacific.
No, certainly. So I think there are two dimensions there. One, of course, there's certainly a priority for the Indo-Pacific. As I see it, the conceptualization of the Indo-Pacific and how to deal with the challenges was first really worked out in the first Trump administration. If you go back in history, there was a time when, for example, President Clinton spoke of China as a strategic partner. It was President Bush who, for the first time, started talking of China as a strategic competitor. But I think the Bush administration was preoccupied with dealing with the challenge of 9/11 and how to respond to that. And couldn't quite figure out how to respond to the China challenge. When the Obama administration came in the beginning, they were talking of strategic reassurance to China. That US will integrate China's rise in a harmonious way. And then they realized that the way China was taking unilateral and assertive positions, including in South China Sea, East China Sea, that was not going to work. So then they started talking of a pivot to Asia. But then some in Obama administration argued that pivot was too strong a word. You don't want to signal that you're taking away from Europe. That's also important. West Asia is important. So they spoke of rebalance to Asia. And many argued that even that rebalance couldn't quite be carried out because challenges in Europe remained for the US. Russia had moved into Crimea in 2014. Challenges in West Asia, Middle East remained. And so whatever was articulated in policy, not fully realized. And then that's when the Trump administration came in. First, they revived the Quad, which had been languishing since 2007, of India, Australia, Japan, and the US. They started official level meetings, then they started foreign minister level meetings. They conceptualized the idea of the Indo-Pacific. The Pacific Command based in Hawaii was renamed the Indo-Pacific Command. So that was a signal that in terms of responding to the China challenge, the US saw India as an important partner. Now, when you come to Trump 2.0, the new phase of the administration, who were the foreign ministers invited to the inauguration in January? It was the foreign ministers of India, Japan, and Australia, the Quad countries. The first multilateral meeting that Secretary of State Rubio did was of the Quad foreign ministers. The first bilateral meeting he had was with the Indian foreign minister who was here. So again, it's reflecting where the importance is. So I think in terms of how the current administration sees this global challenges, as I see it, as a person now based in India, is that certainly continues to see China as a major challenge. And US officials have said from time to time across administrations now that they see China as the only country with the intent and capability to replace the US in the international system. And China is the main economic, technological, and military challenge to the United States. And that's how they are framing it. Now, if that challenge is there, the sense I get talking to officials here, talking to people in business, that they see India as an important partner in handling that challenge. Because whatever be the US broad policies, US is not saying that they're prepared to be number 2 in the world. They still want to be number 1. So to be number 1, you need to retain your technology lead. And to retain the technology lead, they believe that they need the partnership with a country like India with 1.4 billion people. Today it's been publicly said that 20% of the global talent for semiconductor design is based in India. So, and many of the latest semiconductor designs have come from people doing R&D and technology development work in India. So that's an important partnership. Today there are about 1,800 what are called global capability centers in India servicing doing cutting-edge R&D and technology development work and servicing the global operations for multinational companies, not just operations in the Indian market. And 60% of these GCCs, from what I understand, are held by US companies. So the work being done here, there is enabling the US companies to also remain globally competitive. So it's not just the China challenge. In terms of its own technological interests, economic interests, the US-India relationship is important in its own right. For India, US is the largest trading partner. for US, India is among the top 10 trading partners. So the relationship that is important to both.
Yeah, and since your time when you first took over and served in Moscow, the Overton window has changed so much so that we're now talking about US-India foreign policy and things that you touched on, manufacturing of chips and semiconductors, and we talked about ISET and INDOSEX and India being a major defense partner without being a treaty ally, and now with Trust and Compact. What I saw with INDOSEX was fascinating, that startups and these incubation centers that once looked at foreign policy as something that the bureaucrats in Delhi only touch, now sort of like a mutual fund have a share of the pie where they're sitting at the table and advising the intersection between technology of Silicon Valley and the Department of Defense. It's like going back to the future, the military industrial complex. I mean, that's fascinating when startups today are now reshaping how we think about major defense partnership, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I think from what I see, there is a recognition also in the on the Indian side that not everything can be done at the level of the government or government level engagement. That if you really want to deepen partnership, if you really want to make progress in technology cooperation, you also have to involve business and the academia in these partnerships. Yeah. For example, if you go back and take a look at this initiative on critical and emerging technologies that was launched in January 2023, as part of that initiative, very deliberately, at each stage, business and academia from both sides were involved in the partnership. That you must work together here, because ultimately, when we are talking of high technologies, the businesses need to be assured that that level of technologies partnership is something that the governments will bless. So you need to involve them. Similarly, those involved in the academia, they need to be ensured, the academia in the US, that if they partner with Indian counterparts, that's something that both governments would look at positively. So I think that's the framework in which it is happening. So what you're talking about, that when the startups are convening, it is not just technology people, it's academia, it's governments, they're all there at the same platform. And that's, I see, happening more and more.
That's why INDOSEX last year was at Stanford, a little away from Washington, Delhi, and maybe a future INDOSEX in Bangalore, tapping into that. Speaking of, US-India initiatives, the Quad again, a lot of excitement this year with India being the Quad, hosting the Quad Leaders Summit. No immediate date set as of now. But I'm curious, given that, how we talked about Quad, it's gone far from an Asian NATO to critical emerging technology, resilient supply chain that we have to still rebuild since the pandemic, vaccine delivery as well. The Quad has evolved so much, as you said, from the tsunami meeting to 2007 to sort of this bellicosity with China that we've really galvanized around the Quad. And Prime Minister Modi is the only one among the leaders still there from the first Quad leaders meeting. It's hard to crystal ball gaze, but if you could, what does future Quad engagement look like? And what's on the cards for the Quad Leaders Summit in Delhi this year?
Yeah, so again, as you mentioned, the Quad initially came into being in 2004 when the world faced the big tsunami, which impacted Indonesia and other countries. And it was seen at that time that only 4 navies were able to respond to the situation and deal with the humanitarian crisis. These were navies of US, Australia, Japan and India. So there was a sense that could we coordinate a little more to responding to situations in the region. So they had some initial discussions. But by 2007, some of the Quad partners, not India, but some other partners, lost interest in this process and it dissipated. In 2017, the Trump administration revived the Quad. It then met at official level, foreign minister level, and finally summit level meetings. There were 6 summit level meetings in the Biden administration. I think the reason was that, one, certainly a perception that China was becoming very unilateral and assertive in what it's described as its interests, not mindful of interests in others, and people needed to respond. But at the same time, if you're looking at that region, there are many other countries there who are important. The ASEAN countries, the Pacific Island countries. And the whole aim of the exercise is not that they should feel that they have to choose between China and others, but that they should see that they have options other than China, that China is not their only option. So one of the attempts in the framework of the Quad was to provide benefits to other countries in the region, so that the other countries in the region, as the Indian Prime Minister once referred to it, saw Quad as a force for global good. That it is bringing certain advantage, therefore technologies, vaccine partnership. So that's the whole idea. So in today's context, when Japan has challenges with China, or Australia has challenges, India has a border issue, US is defining China as a very difficult economic and technological challenge, and you see the tariffs on China at the moment. Clearly, the aim of the Quad would be to continue to do the kind of activity that other countries in the region see each of the Quad partners individually and the Quad as a group as an important framework to engage with to protect their own interests. And when they see that positive aspect, they will be much more receptive to what the Quad brings to the table. The other thing I have found that because countries are part of the Quad, they are willing to do even more with each other bilaterally. So because India is part of the Quad, I get a sense that Japan and Australia are willing to do even more with India bilaterally because they are part of the Quad. I saw comments in the US last couple of years where senior leaders, officials have said that because India is part of the Quad, we should do more technology partnerships with India. So the Quad arrangement is enabling all these countries to do deeper bilateral partnerships. And I think that is also of advantage to everyone. So that's how I see the Quad. So I think if the summit is convened in the fall of this year, which is tentatively on the cards, the whole aim would be to assess where the Quad is in the current context. Because the world has changed. I mean, how US is defining its policies has changed. The US-Europe relationship is undergoing some transformation. West Asia is in ferment. President Trump will soon be visiting Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. There are difficulties related to the Houthis, there are challenges in the Israel-Palestine equation. And in the Indo-Pacific, the challenges continue. So given this whole ferment, including on trade issues, where is the world today? And therefore, what should be the role that Quad partnership brings to the table? So I suspect that would be the first level of assessment. And based on that, you would define that in specific areas, where do you deepen the Quad partnerships? I mean, one area, for example, can be critical minerals.
Absolutely.
If you look at critical minerals, there's so much concentration of critical mineral availability and processing in China, which is not good for national security or economic security of anybody, including the Quad partners. So what do you do there? Another area could be the pharmaceutical sector.
Absolutely.
US has strengths in pharmaceutical sector, including in intellectual property. India has strengths in pharmaceutical sector, including in generics. But in certain areas, APIs, intermediate, starting materials, there is heavy concentration in China. So how do you ensure economic security there? So these are the kind of subjects that one could profitably discuss.
Absolutely. Critical minerals did come up in the joint statement as Prime Minister Modi and President Trump released. Since you speak about multilateral engagement, there's another one we want to talk about. At the G20 in 2023, the IMEC, the India Middle East Economic Corridor, came about. A transformational thing with GCC, India and European countries, and of course with the US patronage. Two parts to that question. Of course, you served in Israel, so you're very familiar with that part of the world, the Levant and the GCC part of the world. But one is, IMEC right now is high on the agenda. But also, when we talk about I2U2, there hasn't been much that's happened the same way. People talk about it as a West Asia Quad. What is the outlook on I2U2 vis-a-vis IMEC? Is it also another thing of curtailing the China influence in the region, given China and Iran also have a strategic partnership?
No, I don't think the I2 or IMEC were focused on China as such. They were focused more on deepening US and India's partnerships further with the countries in the region and beyond. So that's the out. So if you look at I2U2, that objective was different, bringing together Israel, India, UAE and the US to do joint projects in India for supplies to the Gulf.
Correct.
As initial, the focus was on food security, it was on energy. So there, of course, the difficulty at the moment is that because of very active phase of the conflict on the Israel-Palestine issue since October 2023, how do UAE and Israel relate to each other to do more things together? That's something we have to watch. Similarly, the India-Middle East corridor, if you're looking at, is to enhance connectivity between India and West Asia, and then between the Gulf Arab countries and Israel, and then from Israel to Europe. And again, from comments coming out in the public domain, it is clear that the India-UAE, India-Gulf connectivity is being worked upon and deepened. There is a lot of work going on and interest in deepening the Israel-Europe connectivity. and there Greece is showing interest. Italy is showing interest. India opened a new consulate general in Marseille, in France. France is showing interest. So the missing piece is the connectivity between UAE and Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I think that as things sort of let up a bit in West Asia, perhaps that's something that countries can work on. And if that happens, then certainly it will add to the connectivity between India and Europe. And if India and Europe do a free trade agreement, there'll be a need for that. India, UK have done a free trade agreement, and then through Europe also to the US.
Yeah.
And it'll give routes other than the long route through South Africa, Cape of Good Hope, the long route and the good route from Suez Canal, but it has limits to its capacity.
Yeah.
You also have the Houthi challenge. Absolutely. So it'll give an alternative route, and if global trade and cooperation is to expand, you need many routes. And so that's where I think IMEC will make a contribution.
Speaking of some things change, some things remain the same, the India-Pakistan equation, you've served on the PI division, and we think about it, right? I mean, since Prime Minister Vajpayee took the bus of peace and friendship across the Wagah-Attari border, stood at the Minari, Pakistan, were involved with the Kargil war. Your President Musharraf come for the Agra summit and you have the parliament attacks. Then Bombay 2008, you have Uri, Pathankot, Pulwama, Pelgam. It almost seems like 2 steps forward, 8 steps back. And Steve Cohen had prophesied many years ago, shooting for a century. At 77 years, it's just one of those geopolitical conundrums that just set for where it is, partly because of the nature of the Pakistani state and the military establishment that calls the shot, and sort of the obsession on wresting Kashmir away. Death by 1,000 cuts, as Zulfikar Ali Bhutto put it away. And at the time of this recording, I want to caveat, Operation Sindoor has taken place, so a lot of shifting sands.
No, sure, but I'd make 2 points here. So I would say first, there are many geopolitical fault lines that have gone on for centuries.
Of course.
If you look at Europe, there are huge geopolitical fault lines.
The Middle East,
you have between Russia and Western Europe. You had an earlier geopolitical fault line between Germany and France, which they've tried to resolve through the European Union.
Yes.
You have a geopolitical fault line in West Asia. You have geopolitical fault lines in East Asia, North and South Korea. It has gone on between China and Japan. So there are a large number of geopolitical fault lines in the global context. In Europe, they had talk of 100 years war earlier. So they take time to resolve. So that's one. The India-Pakistan situation is not unique in that sense in terms of length of the problem. It's a problem that has been a product of our colonial history.
Of course.
Of the British policy of divide and rule. But in the more immediate context, the challenge has been that since 1980, Pakistan has sought to use terrorism against India to try and leverage for its political ends. The world has reached a stage where there is zero tolerance for terrorism. You saw the action that the US took after 9/11, went into Afghanistan, and went after the terrorists who are operating from there. Even now, when required, the US uses drones. Recently, they had killed Ayman Zawahiri. So that's the action US takes. If you look at Israel, after the major terror attack on 7th October 2023, Israel has carried out huge operations. So this is the signal, I think, from India, that in the current global context, there is zero tolerance for terrorism, and Pakistan has to move away from its policy of using terrorism to pose challenges for the Indian state. So let's see how it plays out. I think people have to understand that there have to be single set of policies in every context. If the US has zero tolerance for terrorism, Israel has zero tolerance for terrorism, they should expect other countries too will have zero tolerance for terrorism. And if you see in the US, there was huge criticism from time to time for the fact that Pakistan had supported the Taliban at a time when US troops were operating in Afghanistan.
Of course.
And they had killed US troops.
Absolutely.
And if you go back and remember in 2017 and 2018, President Trump had said publicly that stop all aid to Pakistan, and they're hoodwinking us. So Pakistan is a particular challenge in the global and regional context that I think people have to work together to address that challenge, and clear message to Pakistan that it has to move away from its support for terrorist groups. You may recall that Secretary Clinton,
Yes.
when she had visited Pakistan, in a public statement had said that you can't expect to breed snakes in your neighborhood and think that they will never bite you.
Yep,
So,
only bite people.
that's the complex challenge we are dealing with.
Speaking of my penultimate question, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the China factor, given you've seen China for many, many years, from your time in foreign service and Deng Xiaoping's. There was always a Deng Xiaoping creed of hide your strength and bide your time, or Sun Tzu's art of war of appear strong when you're weak and weak when you're strong. Has this in the last 10 years, the last decade or so, when we've seen Xi Jinping, we've seen the Doklam standoff and Mamlapuram reset, has Xi Jinping kind of said, iron hand, no velvet glove? And you've seen that with the bellicosity in the South China Sea, the Spratlys, Paracels, which even ASEAN nations are worried about as well. Has there now been this assertiveness in Beijing that's worried everyone? And of course, India has got one of the longest borders with China. You saw what the PLA did in 2020. And since then, even relations, have sort of been, even though India and China have a trading relationship, have been down. So what's the China factor that India understands better than the rest of the world does?
Well, clearly, I think this so-called policy of hide your strength, bide your time is over. And China has shown since 2012-13 that it feels it has arrived on the international stage and can unilaterally assert its positions, and that's what they are doing. And everybody is recognizing them. The other thing is that if you remember, in the US, it was argued for a long time that by integrating China in the international mainstream, you will lead to political and economic liberalization in China. And now you hear US policymakers and others say that that was a mistake and that policy has failed. And now they have to address China in a different context. So I think, as far as India is concerned, we have a particular challenge because we share a border. And from time to time, we face challenges along that border. In 2020, there was a conflict and some Indian soldiers lost their lives, some Chinese soldiers lost their lives. But India took a very firm stand. I referred to the C-17, C-130. We used them to mobilize more than 50,000 troops at very short notice at heights of 16 to 18,000 feet, which was a major feat. But we were able to firmly assert our position there on the ground. So I think the message from India is clearly that we will assert our position firmly to defend our interests if challenged. And that China should understand that they cannot push India in any unilateral way. So that's the context when we are dealing. And right now, I think after a hiatus of almost 4 or 5 years, and after that incident, for example, India banned all Chinese apps.
Absolutely.
In the US, there is still a debate about which app to ban, but India banned all Chinese apps. Any Chinese investment in India to ensure national and technological security is approved on a case-by-case basis. But now I think what we see is both governments, including the Chinese, are saying that let's see if we can try and move away from where we are and start the process of improving the relationship, enhancing some areas of cooperation. So step by step, very slowly, the process is starting. We still don't have direct flights between India and China as yet. That has not been restarted. But some of the pilgrimage routes, the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, they are being looked at. So step by step, they're trying to see how to rebuild the relationship. But let's see how it progresses.
On a final note, now that since your years of foreign service, you were more of a private sector hat, advising companies and all. Trade is the big word here in this town. And we've seen in Trump 1.0, Trump 2.0, tariffs have been a key instrument of President Trump's foreign policy. April 1 is a joke day, but April 2 is no laughing matter as President Trump announced tariffs. India hit with 26%. Even before the tariffs, for a long time, India and the US have had, a relationship on trade which has been fair, and the TPF sort of restarted that conversation and addressed some of the issues. Where does it go now in the trade relationship? A lot of your clients would be asking you how to make sense of this trade and tariff world. And we saw the India-UK free trade agreement and the BTA in the pipeline, the negotiations. So to crystal ball gaze and close this podcast, what does US-India trade look like in an era of Trump's tariffs?
So, in fact, as we discussed briefly earlier, clearly one can see that both governments are engaged in very serious and intense discussions to get the first tranche of a multi-sectoral free trade agreement done. And those discussions are going on. Both have assessed positively. You saw recently the Secretary of Treasury, Besant, say that India would be among the first that we will achieve. The advisor to trade to President Trump, Pete Navarro, saying that the India-US trade agreement is moving at Trump speed. And President Trump himself has said that, it's going well, India is ready to work out a deal. So I think there is intent to do that. The US is an important export market for India. India wants to plug into the reordering of supply chains that is going on and take advantage for itself and its partners from that. So with all this happening and the deepening technology partnership between India and the US, and therefore the interests of companies on both sides, I think the attempt is, as has been mentioned in the joint statement, that by 2030, if you can take the trade to a level of $500 billion to the current level of $200 billion, that would be an important objective to achieve. But while doing that, try and maintain a broad balance in the trading relationship. You don't want a huge surplus or deficit in either direction. That doesn't work in today's context. So I think that would be the attempt.
Speaking of surplus, I've had a surplus of information from you and all our listeners have had. Ambassador Arun Singh, thank you so much for your time. Until the next time, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.